VCT Champions 2024 is about halfway over, which means the VCT offseason is fast approaching. So today we're going to be looking at a collection of players from 3 different VCT leagues, the Pacific, EMEA, and Americas. Every player in this video is a player that either we know is not coming back to the team that they were on this year, or they're players that are still on rosters but need to have their contracts renewed. So this is the board we have today. As I said, we're talking about players of EMEA, Pacific, and Americas. I would put China on the board here, but there wasn't a lot of free agents, and I don't know a lot about the Chinese players to make an educated guess. So I figured it's best to talk about the other 3 leagues when it comes to this video. So we're going to be going from left to right, so we're starting with players from the EMEA region, starting with the only free agent off the Fnatic roster in Hero. Hero playing as well as he has so far has kind of put Fnatic in an interesting spot, because Hero came in because Leo has health issues and wants to rest up for now, and Leo was arguably the team's best player before he had to step out. Even when he was sick and really not at 100%, he was still one of their best players. So you sub him out and then you bring in Hero and he kind of revitalizes the team. He wasn't their best player, I don't think so at least, but he did give this team a new look that really seemed to pay off. So if Fnatic end up winning champions with Hero being a big part of that, that does kind of put Fnatic in an interesting spot. Obviously, it's great to have another trophy, but do you want to do one of your longtime players dirty, or do you keep with the young gun in Hero? Going to be very interesting to see what Fnatic do in the offseason. My guess is Leo is probably going to come back to the roster, as they've already stated. Obviously, things can change, so don't take them at their word just yet, but we'll see what happens. Moving on, we have 5 players from the Giant X roster. That includes Cloudy, Hoodie, Fitno, Redgar, and Famzy. Redgar being benched during the season and Famzy coming in to replace him, so both of those players' contracts are up. With how mediocre Giant X were throughout the whole year, I'd be surprised if any of these players come back, but it would be kind of surprising if they don't at least bring 1 or 2 players back. But with the roster just not being good this year, maybe they look for an entirely new roster, so we'll see what happens, but my guess is maybe they keep 1 or 2 of these players, but it's definitely not Redgar. Moving on, we have 2 players from the Team Heretics roster. We have Boo, the IGL and brother of Mini Boo, and we have Patatak, who isn't currently on the Heretics roster, but he was a substitute for them at Shanghai, very famously. When they went on that grand final run at Shanghai, losing to Gen G, Patatak was a big part of it, but he didn't want to be a part of a 6-man roster. He wants to be a mainstay in a roster. So that's what he's looking for, so he's probably not returning to Team Heretics unless they decide to swap out one of their players. But I don't think that happens, and I think that Boo probably ends up staying with the team. I don't see any reason why they would be looking for an IGL change. Heretics have been a very good team throughout the year. Plus, with Mini Boo being on the roster, I think he's probably going to want to play with his brother, so I wouldn't expect Boo to make a roster change, but hey, we'll see what happens. Anything can happen. Then we have 2 players from the Team Vitality roster in Sender and Runner. Vitality was an interesting team this year, having higher expectations coming into the year than they had last year, with a newly built roster with some pretty solid players on it like Safe and Trex, but it didn't end up reaching their potential until Stage 2 of the EMEA League, where they looked very good down the stretch and went to the grand finals of the playoff bracket. However, an unfortunate early exit at Champions makes me think that they're probably going to be looking for a change. Runner was pretty solid for them down the stretch, so I think Sender is the more likely person to not return. Once Safe went on that duelist role, Runner went to the Sentinel role, and it looked pretty good. So I think they probably want to keep him, but maybe they don't want to make a change at IGL, so maybe they end up keeping Sender. But overall, I think maybe they look to Tier 2 players, look to find a John QT type, but if they don't want to make a change there, then Sender's probably going to be back. But I think that's the most likely roster change when it comes to Vitality. So those are all the players with expiring contracts in the EMEA League. We're going to move to the Pacific League now. So starting with the Pacific League, we have Buzz of DRX. Buzz has been a longtime member of that roster, surviving the roster changes that DRX ended up doing this year, starting the year off by kicking off Arby and Zest, and then getting rid of Stacks throughout the year. But they ended up keeping Buzz and Mako as the main 2 players to help bring the younger core into a very competitive team, which they have been. I would expect the organization of DRX to want Buzz to stay. If they wanted to kick out more longtime members than Stacks, I feel like they would have done it at the same time, but maybe they were just waiting till the offseason. But I think with Buzz being as good as he is, because he is a very good player, I think the org probably wants to keep him, but I don't know if the player is going to want to stay. Maybe he's looking for a change of scenery. There are going to be some Pacific teams with some rosters to fill, so we'll see how it goes, but I am kind of leaning toward Buzz might want to change teams. This is obviously just me speculating. I have no idea, but I feel like with DRX just changing up the roster is what they've been doing throughout the year. Maybe they go further with it in the offseason. Moving on, we have a very consequential amount of players that have expiring contracts, nearly the entire roster of Gen G. Everybody except for Charon, so we have Meteor, Texture, Lakia, and Munchkin. A lot of talk about Lakia lately, a lot of people just dunking on him for his performance at Champs, which I think is unfair. Yes, he didn't have the best tournament, and throughout the year, Lakia just objectively has probably been Gen G's worst player. I'm not saying that to demean him or anything, or to join in on the dunking, but when you look at it objectively, most of these players pass him. Every single part of this team has been a very important piece, but if you're going to make a roster change, it's probably Lakia. But I would expect Gen G to want to bring back all these players because they nearly won 2 championships. They won Shanghai, then they made it to grand finals at Madrid. Bad performance at Champs, but that's just one tournament. That doesn't mean this roster can't win in the future. However, there is talk that Gen G as an organization might not have a lot of money right now, might be looking to cut costs. And with these players playing as well as they have throughout the year, they're probably going to be asking for pay raises. So we'll see if this ends up being a EG 2023 situation where one of the best teams in the world just completely disbands after the offseason, mainly due to org financials and bureaucracy that the players don't have any control of. But if these players want to stay together and get another shot at a championship, I think they're going to try to make it work. If they end up re-signing everybody except for one, I can see Lakia being the odd man out there. Moving on to a global esports player, we have Lightning Fast. His contract is up. With that roster being as bad throughout the year as they were, I wouldn't expect many of those players to make a return. So with Lightning Fast contract being up, don't expect him to be back in a global esports jersey next year. Then we have 3 players from the T1 roster, Carpe, Saya Player, and Rossi. I believe both Saya Player and Rossi are restricted free agents, so T1 is allowing them to look for different teams while still having them under contract. And it's kind of surprising to me that Saya Player is a player that they look to get rid of, because while T1 definitely didn't have the year that they wanted, especially with coming in with at least decently high expectations, missing out on Madrid, having a very mediocre stage 1, but still somehow making it to Shanghai, then having a bad Shanghai, and then a not so good stage 2 to not even qualify for the playoffs. So I understand why they probably want roster changes, but if I'm going to do that, I can see Rossi and Carpe being odd mans out, but Saya Player I think was the best player throughout the year, and he was last year as well. I think their issue was they didn't really have a set IGL. Now they have that in stacks, and at least the roster improved a little with him in the roster. At least that's to my understanding, but I don't think getting rid of a player as talented as Saya Player is a great idea. I think he's probably going to find a different tier 1 team. I'd be surprised if we don't see him somewhere in tier 1 Valorant because he is very talented. Rossi, I would expect, probably goes to a tier 2 North American team. Don't know if we're going to see him in the Americas League, but maybe he can be an important part of a tier 2 roster to help them beat Ascension. Moving on, we have some recent announcements with the Bleed roster. Zest, Ye, Retlas, and Darion are all off the roster. They will not be returning. Ye not returning is no surprise to me with how disastrous the year was for Bleed. These players not returning makes perfect sense. At this point, I just feel bad for Ye. He's had a really tough stint the past 2 years. Right now, I just don't know if I see Ye turning around his career. I still think he has the potential to do it, but I'm not going to bet on it. If he does want to return to pro play, it's probably back in North America, maybe on another tier 2 roster that is a better fit for him than Disguised was. I could see Zest landing on a different Pacific roster. Hey, maybe DRX brings him back. Doubtful, but it's possible. And with Retlas and Darion, I wouldn't expect them to get another tier 1 spot. Maybe they go to tier 2. But hey, there is going to be a lot of open spots, so maybe those 2 players can find a home. Moving on, we have the Americas League, which as you can see, has a lot of upcoming free agents. Just like last year, the Americas is going to have a lot of turnover this offseason, starting with the entirety of the 100 Thieves roster. All of them have contracts expiring. Cryocells, Bane, Asuna, EU, and Busio. This really puts 100 Thieves in kind of a tough spot. I know that this was the players' choices to have their contracts end at the end of the year, but with how the team performed this year, how does 100 Thieves evaluate this roster? If you re-sign all these players, which version of this roster are you going to get? Are you going to get the one that made it to top 4 in Shanghai that unfortunately flamed out, but still top 4 placement? Or are you getting the team that had a very mediocre stage 2, barely made it into the playoffs, and then lost when it mattered most against Crew? After starting pretty strong in that playoff bracket, beating Sentinels. It really was just night and day with this team. Either they were one of the best teams in the Americas or one of the most inconsistent, frustrating to watch teams. If I were to guess the players coming back, Boostio is probably a safe bet. EU was sneakily one of the better players in the Americas, so I would expect if 100 Thieves don't want to bring them back, he's definitely going to land on his feet somewhere, but I think he probably returns. When it comes to Cryocells, I can see him personally wanting a change of scenery, but if the org wants to bring him back and he's fine with making a return, I think he deserves the spot. So I can see Cryo returning, but when it comes to Bane and Asuna, I feel like it might be time. Bane has been on this roster for a couple years now, and he's been good for them, but you could do better than Bane on your smokes roll. That's just objectively true. I think he's a solid player, and there's no reason why he deserves to be kicked off the roster, but if you're looking for some kind of change-up, that might be an easy one to make. And with Asuna, he's been on this roster for a very long time. When they originally brought him on, they built the roster around him. He's been given chance after chance, time after time on this roster. Is it time to let him go? He had a pretty inconsistent year, starting the year off pretty poorly, but slowly got better as the team got better. But the whole team wasn't showing up in the moments that really mattered most. I think Asuna fit in really well with the team in terms of personality, but at this point, with the amount of chances that Asuna has been given at the tier 1 level, I think there is a pretty strong chance that 100 Thieves look to move on. He may find himself on another tier 1 roster. I could see that happening with the amount of jobs that are going to be available, but overall, I don't know if I see Asuna or Bane returning. Moving on, we have the entirety of the Evil Geniuses roster: Superman, Apoth, Derek, Jogamo, and Nature. I would say it's pretty safe to say that Jogamo probably isn't returning with how good he looked this year and last year. I think people are going to be chomping at the bit to sign this guy. One of the better players in the entire Americas League, if I do say so myself. And when it comes to Superman, Apoth, Derek, and Nature, those were players that people weren't exactly expecting to be in Tier 1 Valorant this year. This is a budget roster. This is a roster they built after blowing up their World Championship winning roster. Thanks, Evil Geniuses. But maybe with how some of these players perform, maybe they want to return to Evil Geniuses if Potter stays. Potter might be a big draw for players to sign with Evil Geniuses if she decides to stay with that organization. I'm kind of expecting her to change which team she's coaching for, but if Evil Geniuses ends up keeping her, that might entice at least 2, maybe 3 of these players to stay. I could see Derek getting another tier 1 job, Nature, maybe not, but Superman, he had his moments as well. So did Nature, so I'm not trying to just dunk on him, but overall, I think we're probably not going to see a lot of these players in Tier 1 next year. Moving on, we have 2 players from Energy. We, of course, already know that Victor is off the roster. He was kicked off after their very unfortunate performance in Stage 2. But Crashy's contract is also up. And Chet is no longer the coach of Energy, so I think this is very dependent on who the new coach is. If FNS ends up having control over this roster, over what players they get, over what coach they get, then I do see Crashy's chances of staying as higher, but overall, I don't know if they bring him back. While I do think Crashies is a very good player, and in 2023 I thought he was pretty good, in 2024 it was definitely not his year. Him as well as the whole roster just were not performing well as a unit, so I could see him changing scenery, but if he wants to come back and if whatever new coach comes into the roster, if they want him, then I could see that still being a thing. But overall, I think those 2 players probably gone. Moving on, we have Vanity of C9. So far, the only roster change from C9. They are yet again getting rid of Vanity. This is like the second time they've gotten rid of him. So maybe he ends up being back on this roster in like 2 years. That's entirely a possibility, knowing C9. But overall, this is kind of the change that I was expecting. I think they definitely need a new IGL one that's a bit more in tune with the meta. I don't think Vanity is a bad IGL, but in terms of his record with teams over the past couple of years, it doesn't lend itself to, a lot of confidence that this team is going to get anywhere if they run it back. They need an IGL that can get Oxy going at all times, because if he is incredibly consistent, C9 could really be dangerous. Then we have 3 players from the crew roster in Klaus, Melsner, and Kesnet. Klaus was benched by this team, so don't expect to see him back on the roster. But Melsner and Kesnet, I am kind of expecting to stay. Kesnet not being on crew just feels wrong. People forget, but he was briefly on Leviathan. It was like a 5-month stint, and he only played at lock-in with them. He immediately went back to crew, because that's just what feels right. If Kesnet is going to be playing in Tier 1 Valorant, which he definitely deserves to, he is one of the best duelists in the world. I don't care what anybody says. Oh, he's overrated, blah, blah, blah. He's a good player. He's just inconsistent. It's very frustrating, but Crew, that's kind of them. They're good, but they're very inconsistent. I would expect Crew to want to keep Kesnet, and I do expect him to re-sign with them. Melsner, I could see coming back as well, seemingly being the better fit for the IGL, but I think what would probably be best if this roster brings in a new IGL. I don't know who you swap out for that, so maybe Melsner ends up being the odd man out, but his performance overall was good for me to think that it wouldn't be a bad decision to bring it back. Moving on, we have 4 players from the Leviathan roster in Mazzino, Tex, Com, and King. Definitely expecting King to stay. He was one of the best players for that team, one of the better IGLs in Americas. Maybe not the best caller of all time, but his individual performance is very solid. I could see Tex re-signing as well if he wants it. I think the org probably looks to keep him. Com, I am expecting him to not be on the roster next year. He was probably this team's worst player throughout the year. Com is definitely a good player, but I think he was just a little bit overrated after his Champions performance last year. But hey, maybe he goes on another crazy run at this Champions and just gets seemingly every clutch possible, because that's what happened at Champs 2023. He won every clutch. And Mazzino, with the controversy surrounding him right now with the accusations from his ex-girlfriend, which I'm not going to get into, unless that situation turns in Mazzino's favor, I'm not expecting Leviathan to bring him back. I don't think they want that smoke. We'll see how that situation develops. Not really going to speak on it too much. Moving on, we have 3 players from the Sentinels roster in Zekken, Tens, and Saucy. I'd be shocked if Zekken or Tens ends up changing teams, winning Masters Madrid, then having a solid upset win against Gen G in the group stage of champs. I'm filming this before their match with DRX, so we'll see how that one goes, so I'm just not going to speak on that. But overall, even if they don't go deep at Champions, I think Zekken and Tens are basically locks to stay. If Sentinels are going to make any roster changes, I would expect it to be Saucy. Overall, I'm expecting Sentinels to keep the same roster. It's clearly been successful, definitely a bit of an up and down season, but still a successful roster. But maybe Saucy's a bit homesick, maybe he wants to go back to a Brazilian team. We'll see what ends up happening there, but if Sentinels are going to make a roster change, it's probably him. And our last player is Khalil of the Furia roster. Furia being a team that had a really rough first half of the season, but then looked pretty good, honestly, in Stage 2. Khalil being a pretty decent part of that, so maybe with a bit of a rejuvenated roster, Furia can actually be a competitive team next year. And maybe Khalil sees that vision and wants to be a part of it, but also maybe just being a part of an org that lost so much, maybe that just puts a bad taste in your mouth. So I could see it happening where he stays, but I don't know how many of those players want to stay on that roster. So those are all the players that we have to talk about. Obviously, these are not all the players that are going to be changing teams. There's going to be teams that drop players that we're not expecting, some players that are still under contract that end up getting booted. But these are what we know are players that are going to have contracts up and will be needing new ones if they are to stay with their old team. Let me know in the comment section down below what you guys thought of the video. Who do you think is changing teams? Who do you think is staying? Please click like if you enjoyed this video. Thank you all very much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.